Welcome to another episode of Federal Data Talk, the podcast where we dive deep into the rapidly changing world of data, especially in the public sector, with your host, me, Stephen Cole, an Azure DoD specialist at Microsoft Federal. Let's jump right in. But before we get started, got to satisfy the legal folks. Hit it.
The content provided in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The opinions expressed herein belong solely to the individual host or guest and do not represent those of any other person or entity. All rights reserved. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including recording, photocopying, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. For permission requests, DM the publisher on X, Federal Data Talk. The information in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice. Listeners should not act upon any information provided in this podcast without seeking professional counsel.
All right. Hey, welcome. I've got, all right. I'll just jump right in. She's an ass kicker. She may not like me introducing her that way, but fine. She's coming up. We were talking the last 20 minutes about like all the things, you know, whether it be data related or cloud related, or how to take an idea and gather a whole bunch of people's opinions about it and go deploy it. I think she called it a tiger team. We'll call it whatever you want. I like it. Megan, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk data.
It's a fun topic. I give people a hard time because I'm sarcastic about saying it's everybody's favorite topic that nobody wants to talk about, because data is viewed at a bunch of different ways. Depending upon your perspective. As a data owner, you're gonna have a different perspective than somebody who's just a user creating policy docs on, you know, some of our modern work tools. So this podcast is going to be listened to by folks who don't work at Microsoft. So I would love a little bit of backstory from you about how security and data are viewed from your perspective, and then kind of like how you got to where you are, and you know how you're kind of on the bleeding edge, so to speak, in terms of how DoD customers or DIB folks are enabled to go and support our DoD customers, if you could, please.
Yeah. So let's take a step back. Let's talk about historically when our DoD customers think about security, we're not thinking about data first. Data is at the center of our zero trust set of pillars. And I think that's intentional because data's the meat and potatoes of what we're doing, right? Most attacks that originate from our adversaries are data centric. You know, most of the time, China is not trying to figure out how to, use DDoS to shut us down. Most of the time, we're after the data, right? So when we think about it from that perspective, we take a look back. Defense in depth has always been historically kind of the tagline that we use to describe how we're protecting our networks. We start at the perimeter and we work our way in by way of proxies and access control lists. But that's no longer sufficient when we look at the zero trust framework, right? We have to think in terms of where is our adversary? They're on the inside because we assume breach. And so if by assuming breach, we don't have our data protected, our adversary is no longer one or two hops away. A DMZ or a demilitarized zone is no longer sufficient to keep the adversary on the outside. Now they're a SharePoint site away, or a folder away, or a mailbox away. And if our data is not protected, and data is the keys to the kingdom, they're truly just one file over, right? So we have to change our approach to how we think about security, and we have to focus it on zero trust. And coming back to that, assume breach. If we assume breach, data security becomes the most important pillar, and thereby why I believe it's at the center of the zero trust.
Okay, thank you so much for that level set. Like when it comes to that perspective, and even backing up, how did you, so was it multiple cycles with customers who weren't taking that approach in order to get you to that to that point where you realized that was the, I guess, the correct posture to take? Like, help me understand how you came up with that. I would love to start the discussion there if it's all right with you.
Absolutely. So before I landed at Microsoft, I spent about 10 years working as a defense contractor, both on enterprise cybersecurity programs, as well as with a system integrator supporting a high-profile Marine Corps system. And I focused primarily on cybersecurity, but under the umbrella of governance, risk, and compliance. So I myself have experienced checkbox security, whereby we go through the security assessment and we're checking the box. And our goal was, whenever we would write implementation details, was to layer on as many security protocols as possible. How are we protecting our data? Well, let's begin at the network level and let's talk about our DMZ. Let's talk about the fact that you have to CAC authenticate. It's not public facing. You have to, once you're inside the network, you have to re-CAC authenticate into the application itself, and you're queried against OCSP or certificate revocation list even. And we would build on these layers of defense in depth, but very rarely were we ever getting granular enough to where we could look at the data itself. And even when we did, we would do things like, okay, we're going to encrypt one database table that contains passwords only. But we weren't expanding that to include warfighter data. So when I landed at Microsoft and realized there's so much more to security, even defense in depth, there's so much more to the breadth and depth of what we could be protecting that we aren't. When that realization coincided with the zero trust, that's really kind of what made me realize that there's a whole layer of things that we're not protecting. Like, as I alluded to, the meat and potatoes, data being the meat and potatoes of what we're here to protect. So, fast forward 10 years doing that, landed at Microsoft, and I was assigned Microsoft Purview, the M365 side of Purview, as my primary product that I would be get to knowing and selling and talking to customers about. And there is so much to offer from a data security perspective, from whether it be data classification services, where we're leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to do a lot of this heavy lifting for us in terms of knowing data, labeling data, and protecting data. It's almost, somebody said to me once, you're removing the soldier from the equation. If we're going to talk about in DoD context specifically, removing the soldier from the equation of having to reason over that data and manually apply protections, it's really, it's kind of mind-blowing to think about, the breadth and depth of the data, the warfighter data, the logistics data, et cetera. And we have the capability through the M365 platform to do that natively. It was really eye-opening to come full circle from someone who did this from a GRC perspective outside of Microsoft to now looking at it from the lens of the GRC perspective inside of Microsoft, and realizing there's a lot of white space in terms of what we can enable our DoD customers to protect.
Absolutely.
From a data security perspective.
Well, I had a conversation a couple of days ago about somebody was kind of challenging me, so to speak, about, well, why would you move into the cloud as opposed to just keeping, these data centers going? And, you have all these security apparatuses that you alluded to, physically, where you're outside of the data center, you got to protect and, reinforce all of these security parameters. Why would you go and move all of that into the cloud? And I said, well, let me ask you a question. So there's never been a breach. So you can't get right click, print on some of that and have somebody who's gone rogue a little bit and gone down and potentially posed a risk, whether they were internally of the military and or the DIP. And he goes, oh yeah, that's a good point. So it was like, my point wasn't to stop him in his tracks about pointing out just the logic and how humans make decisions. It's just, you're trying to leverage technology to augment this behavior, and you're trying to be cognizant. I love the way that you had talked about it from the inside out in how there's so many, if you think about the threat being already on the inside, it really just shifts the paradigm as opposed to trying to keep them all out. And I think that that's a very innovative way of looking at it. And so I appreciate that perspective. So when it comes to the application, so rather than looking at things through the lens of a product, which is sometimes what technologists tend to do, what would be, I guess, what would be the type of technologies that would be in this particular solution that you're talking about? And is it a specific platform that's unique to one vendor, or like, help me understand about how you could architect this type of solution?
Well, you said a lot there. So I want to kind of take back to an example. When we look about going to the cloud, or when we talk about going to the cloud, why would a customer want to do that? There's an example that I personally use. It resonates really well with me. A few years ago, the Marine Corps kind of got out of the business of doing like technical operations. They still do to an extent, but a huge chunk of their asset portfolio moved back to the Navy, right? Because the Marine Corps is primarily an expeditionary force. And so really what that said to me was, we're the best at infantry. We're the best at doing these expeditionary type activities. And we're going to let somebody else who really specializes in the technical stuff, the IT side. And again, not to say that the Marine Corps doesn't do any of that, but they really moved a huge chunk of their asset portfolio to folks who specialize in that. And so when you think about that, it really resonated with me from the perspective of the comparison of why migrate to the cloud. Because Microsoft, or, a cloud service provider, that's their primary business. And I have to say, like, obviously I am in the Microsoft, I drink the Microsoft Kool-Aid, I eat the Microsoft dog food. And, I think that as a first party cloud service provider that enables security at the forefront, that Microsoft is really tremendous at doing this. But we want to enable the warfighter to do what is their primary focus, the warfighter mission. And we want to get the warfighter and the MilDeps, or the military components, out of the business of having to worry about the technical stuff, the back end. Why not allow Microsoft or another cloud service provider, but hopefully Microsoft, to take care of the cloud footprint, right?
Sure.
Like, gone are the days
approach.
when...
It's a very
gone are the
reasonable
days
approach.
of, the Marine Corps operating their own, or, any MilDep really, operating their own data center stack, soup to nuts. Let the pros handle that, and you focus on the expeditionary stuff, the mission. Keep that at the forefront. That's what you do best, is protecting our national security. Microsoft is arguably a little bit better at the technology side. So let's divide and conquer, and let's partner.
Yeah, I like that. So I like that approach. So given that perspective and the 10, over a decade of experience working with, various technologies, and also in the defense industrial base, knowing that technology is changing so quickly now, even with the advent of generative AI, how would you architect, or what would your product stack look like? If you were going to deploy the threats inside? How do we, what kind of suite, or what kind of suite of tools would we have at the ready, Megan?
That's a great question. If you're completely greenfield looking at a digital transformation, I would probably begin with a mission landing zone, which is a little bit like a pre-configured environment that a DoD customer could land in, or really any customer, federal or otherwise. Could land initially in a mission landing zone, and you get a lot of stuff out of the box there in terms of it being appropriately hardened according to policy guidelines. And then from there, a lot of it comes down to the information types that you're dealing with from a data security perspective. We use the adage that you don't want to be protecting a $5 bike with a $10 lock. And so we want to take that approach with, from data security all the way up through the platform. If you're using if you are processing a lot of CUI or, otherwise sensitive information types, we have some ability right out of the box with the native M365 platform to include Microsoft Purview to allow you to identify some of this kind of low-hanging fruit, social security numbers, personally identified information, PHI, and so forth, right out of the box. So let's do that quickly and seamlessly right out of the box. And then from there, really depending on, other investments that you've made, Microsoft really prioritizes meeting customers where they are in terms of existing technology investments that we have made. And let's add on to those where we need to and make the most out of your existing investments, in order to create a secure ecosystem. But if I personally were going to add on from there, the first thing I would look at is adding the Defender suite. I would definitely include Microsoft Defender for Cloud for our Azure security service. And I would definitely be sending all of the telemetry from all of these different Defender products into Sentinel, which is our first-party SIEM and extended detection and response tool. Within Sentinel, we have the ability to do some really cool things. My favorite feature within Sentinel are the workbooks. These things are, for the most part, pre-configured. And it's the kind of the intersection of where our assets and our policies meet. And we can draw in telemetry from all different parts of the landscape. Like, for example, there is a data connector from Microsoft Purview for insider risk management that sends telemetry into Sentinel, whereby SOC operators can ingest, receive signal from this tool. And then there are orchestration playbooks by which you can set up, like if you have an insider risk, for example, someone's doing something nefarious, has potentially, like just as an example, downloaded a piece of data, removed the sensitive information type, and is trying to offload this into a third-party tool like Drive or Box or something of that nature. You can automatically, through the security orchestration piece, shut off that user's access and then potentially block them from being able to do anything else or access other parts of the network, even potentially cut off any enhanced
automatically
access that they might have. Yeah, that's through the security orchestration piece. But then even down within insider risk management, we have the ability under adaptive protection to set up basically our appetite for risk within the application, whereby we say, essentially, how many strikes do you want a user to be able to have? And that can be based on comparison to their user group or comparison to their peers, like what's normal for that role and what might look anomalous for that role. So the best way to explain this is through examples. So if I have let's say I'm a system administrator for a tenant within my network. If I'm downloading or sharing information that I shouldn't have access to and I'm using administrative privilege to get to, or it's just very outside of my scope of work. Like, let's say I'm supposed to be administering an application that handles HR data. And I'm over here pulling down data that is completely unrelated. Maybe I'm in a logistics system, or maybe I'm in a supply system, and I'm downloading pieces of data that are way outside the scope of my role. Through adaptive protection, you can immediately cut off access, and you can set basically a threshold for what that user will or will not be able to do based on that adaptive protection. So it adapts in real time without the requirement for a SOC operator to intervene to take action against that insider threat.
Wow. I love the examples. It's terrifying to think about the misuse or the wrong deployment of that being incorrect, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because that's a very powerful, not just a powerful tool, but also just a great way to provide exception management for those tenant administrators or system admins that quite frankly probably have those things happening just as a sake of habit. Folks not having those enforcement guidelines, or what Marine Corps we would call the left and right lateral limits. It's like typically whether a weapon's unloaded or not, if your barrel is facing outside of your left and right lateral limits, you're automatically wrong, right? So and you're doing it just because you're not used to operating on the range. So I say all that to say that the examples that you highlighted are fascinating and should actually, quite frankly, just add a little bit of a warm and fuzzy to those folks who are evaluating whether or not to move forward with a platform like what you call the platform. Is it the Defender Suite? What did you call it?
Yeah, so the Defender Suite really just references our security product stack.
Yeah.
So Microsoft
Keep in
Defender for
mind,
365.
talking to somebody who's ignorant. I'm a Knuckle Dragon Marine here. So yes, I have no problem. I'm teasing. Go ahead. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I have a lot of respect for Marines. My brother got out of the Marine Corps in 99, and his oldest son, my nephew, DJ, is now in the Marines. My brother met his wife in the Marine Corps. So the Marine Corps is a kind of a big part of my story, and actually the reason that I ended up in cybersecurity to begin with. So, and thank you for your service if I haven't already.
That's cool. Well, we'll do push-ups later for not saying it earlier, Megan. So I'm just teasing. Yeah, that's great. So no, I appreciate that. So it is Defender is just a description of the different security products that are available. But I love the fact that there's some automated telemetry ingestion into Sentinel to provide some of those preventative measures to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So let's look at a scenario. I'm going to throw a scenario at you, and then let's land the plane here. If you have let's just say a group of soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, guardians, or civilians that support one of those respective DoD agencies, and they are responsible for innovation, the adoption of net new technologies that are innovative, and there should be kind of this sandbox, so to speak, for them to play in. How would you, I guess, beta test, for lack of a better term, the application of some of these security tools, but also enable folks who want to kind of stretch the limits on some of these new innovative technologies from a data perspective, not necessarily an application perspective, because I'm not trying to have you solve all of that problem, but how would you set up that environment to make it okay for folks to play in that sandbox?
Wow. So the first thing that I would do if I were looking at prioritizing security products from the Defender stack is I would enable Microsoft Defender for Attack Surface Management. This is a tool that is built on the telemetry from our RiskIQ acquisition that is actually an OSINT collection, and it can be even outside of our DoD tenant, whereby it's going to bring together data seeds from all over the internet to basically show what is potentially vulnerable that might be public facing that our adversaries even could have access to. I recently sat through a demo of this, and I was shocked to see that some of our federal agencies, you can run this, you can run a query against basically anything that's in the public domain, and it would return potentially public-facing PII, for example, things that the permissioning was not very locked down, and right on the other side of the login, there would be PII sitting. So that's the first thing I would do is take a look at my environment from the lens of this is what an adversary would do right off the bat. From there, I would bring it inside and enable some of the native functionality that if a customer is using M365 as their primary operating environment, which if they're a Microsoft customer, they're automatically going to have M365. And then ideally, they would have an Azure subscription and they would coincide, right? And their base, the intersection of those two tenants is based on Entra or Azure Active Directory. So I would enable some of the functionality that comes out of the box in M365. And that's going to look like our M365 Defender dashboard. Within there, there's a lot of stuff you can do to thwart risk coming into the network, such as safe links, which checks the URLs that are incoming. It's going to provide policy tips to notify you that a sender is external or that you don't often get messages from that sender. These are very simple things that you can do to enable the user to take security into their own hands that come out of the box. And the other thing I would do is right off the bat, leverage the sensitive information types within the Microsoft Purview platform that are going to enable you to see your data within your environment. Without any additional configuration through the data classification service, you're going to be able to see every PII, full name, social security number, address, clear text credentials, controlled technical information within the environment. There's 314 sensitive information types that come pre-populated out of the box that really cover the gamut of everything from a text string perspective that we basically know the formula behind. Those can be identified without any additional policy set up. Begin there and set labels and policies against those. Those labels and policies can extend to every corner of the network to include Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So right off the bat, if you deploy your DLP policies that every label that's built has a correlating DLP policy in theory. There is some additional configuration that has to take place to set up a DLP policy, but there's some stuff that's auto-suggested to you out of the box. And those can be applied even to your endpoints. So just that, I think 3 things I mentioned don't typically require any additional investment other than potentially MDE. And out of the box, that's going to be a huge chunk of your security threats. And that we're probably talking about a week's worth of work to have the tool identify your data and set up the correlating policies.
So thank you very much. That's a very succinct, detailed answer, and also very forward-leaning in terms of what the projected work effort would be in order to deploy it. So thank you for that. That's fantastic. All right. We've talked about a ton of things. Any saved rounds? Like, what didn't we talk about when we press record that you wanted to touch on here before we jam?
2 things. 1, something that folks can do right off the bat, you can run an insider risk scan. It takes about 48 hours. It's an analytics scan that runs over your environment end to end to identify anything right out of the box that might be nefarious in terms of insider risk management. And then from there, it provides you with suggested data leak policies that you can enable very quickly. That is part of the E5 or G5 investment, but it takes 48 hours. It's happening in the background. It doesn't slow down network performance or anything like that. And you're going to have a ton of telemetry as to how people are interacting with data inside of the environment.
That's incredible. Okay, you said 2 things. That was 1. What was the next?
Second thing is, in order to be ready for M365 Copilot, we have to take data governance very seriously. The intersection of the Purview products coming together, Azure Purview and M365 Purview under this data governance umbrella, this is critical. When we light up artificial intelligence in our network, like M365 Copilot, it is going to shine a light on everywhere where we do not have appropriate rights management turned on for our data. For example, if someone runs a prompt in M365 Copilot looking for credit card numbers that are available within the tenant, if I personally completed a form recently, let's say I ordered Girl Scout cookies from my coworker and I put my credit card number in that form and saved it to my OneDrive, and I didn't protect that. And for some reason, the tenant doesn't have credit card number protection enabled at the tenant level. Someone running a prompt in M365 Copilot can bring that back and view my credit card number. What they do with it is Scout's honor, but from the tenant perspective, we have the ability to protect these things out of the box.
Yeah.
Someone said to me today that we're sitting in a dark room and right now we're holding a match. Copilot is going to turn the lights on. It is going to shine a light on every corner of our enterprise and how we're protecting our data. So in order for us to do this securely and be very confident and collaborating, we have got to take data governance seriously. And that's where Microsoft Purview is paramount.
Yeah. So Megan, I appreciate you. Yeah, you saying it the way that you did. If you're listening to Data Talk and this is one of your first episodes, my suggestion is go back and take a listen to Carly Simon, who Carly and Megan do a lot of great work inside and outside of Microsoft. They actually have she may not want me to talk about it too much, but whatever. There's a Cocktails podcast that they are doing. They're talking with some internal folks and they're bringing some other folks in to talk about their experiences. Fantastic informal discussions around some of these ideas where they dive into the personal application and the professional application and all of those things together. It's a really cool informal discussion. So Carly talks about how she would help people organize their data. So if that's going to be paramount in terms of data governance for turning on and greenlighting AI and some of these new technologies that are going to be applicable in kind of every day for, the next generation of folks that are out there, the next generation of warfighter, go back and listen to that episode. She talks about that. In future episodes, we actually have some other folks that we work with here on the security side. Vishal comes to mind. There's also some other folks who are fantastic technologists who are going to be in here. Megan, I have to ask you, who else should we be talking to? Tell us real quick who we should be talking with.
Oh, wow. I work with a phenomenal team of folks. Let's see. Vishal is amazing. My immediate boss, Lily Davudian, came from the product group for Sentinel in particular. And she is so smart when it comes to Sentinel, as well as extended detection and response, automated attack disruption. I mean, she is excellent.
Those of you listening, leave a comment, leave a review. Let us know where some of what she had touched on that struck a nerve. Megan, for those that did have that nerve struck, how can they get in touch with you? Should they go to LinkedIn? What's the best way for folks to contact Megan?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best way. I don't check it as often as I would like to. If you are a DoD customer and you have a direct question about data security, I'm at Megan Maley at Microsoft.com, and you're more than welcome to reach out.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time today. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
For those of you listen to Data Talk, we come up with new episodes all the time. The Microsoft Speed Dating series, where we have partners and subject matter experts come in and talk. That's our reoccurring series that is going to be back in January 2024 with a partner that we're going to be at the Security Summit in February. So looking forward to seeing everybody there. But for those of you who are listening, appreciate it. Let us know what you thought. Talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Federal Data Talk. Hopefully you've gained valuable insights and inspiration to fuel your journey into the world of data. Join us for new episodes, but don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you don't miss it whenever we release them, for thought-provoking discussions and interviews with industry experts. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.